We're going to talk about section 1.8, the properties of real numbers. Okay, most of these properties you are already familiar with, but maybe not familiar with the formal names. The first properties, and they kind of come in pairs. These are the commutative properties, and I'm going to abbreviate. There are two. There's the commutative property for addition and the commutative property for multiplication. It's okay with me if you just call them the commutative property. To commute means to go back and forth. If you commute to Hillsboro, then you go Waco to Hillsboro, and then probably later in the day, Hillsboro to Waco. There is a change in position. The commutative property with mathematics says that 5 plus 2 is the same as 2 plus 5. Okay? The commutative property for multiplication says 3 times 7 is the same as 7 times 3. You probably became very aware of the commutative property when you were in elementary school. Do you remember maybe you learned your multiplication facts and you learned the 3s, and then when you got to the 7s, you didn't have to learn 7 times 1 or 7 times 2 or 7 times 3 because you already knew those. But you did have to learn some of the others. Okay, the commutative property says it doesn't matter about the position. Now, is the commutative property valid for subtraction? No. Is 5 minus 1 the same as 1 minus 5? No. Just ask your bank account. You know, it makes a big difference. Is it valid for division? No. Only for multiplication or addition. Okay, that's the commutative property. Commute is to move. The next property I want to talk about is the associative property. Do you remember as a youngster, almost everybody's parents at some point said, I don't like you associating with those kids. They're going to be a bad influence on you. In other words, they didn't want you hanging out with that group of people. They wanted your group to change. The associative property says you can change groupings without changing values. Okay, example, with addition. Suppose I have 2 plus 3 plus 7. If I group or associate the 2 and the 3, do you remember that good old Aunt Sally? Remember, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally? She would say, do what's in parentheses first. 2 plus 3 is 5. 5 plus 7 is 12. Okay, and it works out. But what if your mama doesn't want, say you're 3, doesn't want you hanging out with little boy 2? He's a bad guy. So she might say, I really would prefer that you hang out with Mr. 7. Much better guy. She wants your association to change. She wants your group to change. Now, did you move? Look at the order. Is it still 2 plus 3 plus 7? Yeah. 2 plus 3 plus 7? There's no commuting going on. But did the association or the group change? There's a grouping change. That's the associative property. It is also true for multiplication. If I have 3 times 5 times 8, I could do the 3 times the 5 first, then times 8, or 3 times 5 times 8. I could do the 5 times 8, then times the 3. I can group them any way I want. That's the associative property. So key things to remember. Commutative, commute means move. Positions change. Associative, associate is to hang out with, be in a group, and the grouping changed, but the order didn't. Next is one that I think you'll all recognize. It's the distributive property. I know if you took Math 301, you're familiar with this. It's about the only one that we learned by name in there. The distributive property says that you can distribute multiplication over addition or subtraction. Example, if you had 2 times x plus 4, can you distribute? Yes, and my students get real familiar with, I'm probably going to always draw those little arrows, and I'm going to hand out the multiplication. 2 times x is 2x, and 2 times 4. Now, I know that we would call that 2x plus 8, but I wanted it to be very, very clear that I was doing multiplication. Is a distributive property okay? What you'll need to be careful about with the distributive property will be negative signs. You want to watch out for those negative signs. Learn those rules, and they're on the pre-algebra sheet if you need to review them. Okay, there are 2 more properties that you might not be as familiar with. The first one is called the inverse property. Y'all help me keep an eye on time. I do not want to make you late for a class.
This was really difficult because during summer 1 I took the 305.
Mm-hmm.
And of course when you do something like that, you're expected to go in and try to
Just-
process it and
yeah.
make it on your own. And unless it's, and maybe I've gotten so used to you
Mhm.
because I've had you before, it was tough for me. It was
Well,
really
let's-
tough because this wasn't explained.
Okay, let's see if we can explain it. Okay, the inverse property. What do you think of when you hear the word inverse? Reverse. Anybody think opposite? Okay, those are all good. Those are good words that in some way are associated with inverse. Now, the thing I think that makes inverse property a little tougher than some of the others is that what it looks like for addition is not what it looks like for multiplication. Okay, for addition, if I have 6 and I want to add the inverse, the additive inverse is called the opposite. What is the opposite of 6? Negative 6. When you
So you're
add,
saying this, the definition of inverse, we would use opposite? Just
Mhm.
associate, okay.
what is 6 plus negative 6? 0. When you add inverses, you always get 0. Always get 0. Now, it doesn't look the same for multiplication. If I had 6 for multiplication, and I want to multiply it by its, now here comes a big word, multiplicative inverse, the inverse under multiplication is the reciprocal. It is the reciprocal, which means it's the flip. The reciprocal of 6 is 1/6. So opposite is an inverse under addition. Reciprocal is an inverse under multiplication. What happens when you multiply 6 over an implied 1 times 1 over 6? You get 6 over 6, or maybe you canceled them out, you get 1. When you add opposites, you get 0. When you multiply reciprocals, you get 1. But those are inverses, one under addition and one under multiplication. Okay, we'll talk more about it. The last one is the identity. The identity properties, I want you to think of the word identical. Identical. Suppose I have the number 8. What can I add to 8 to get identically the same thing? 0. The identity element for addition is 0. If you add a 0 to something, you still get the something. Suppose I have the number 8 and I want to multiply it by something and get identically what I started with. What do I multiply by? 1. And I still get 8. So they're a little different for addition and multiplication, but I am getting an identity. I get identically what I started with. Now, our job in this lesson is to see if we can figure out, and I'm going to enlarge this for those of you in class, and I'll write something so you can see it. It says, choose the property illustrated by the following statement. So, for problem number 1, if you write down 8 times 7 equals 7 times 8, I think it's very, very clear that that's multiplication. Now, which of your properties, look at the left side, look at the right side, and tell me what's happened. Okay, they moved. There was movement. There was commuting. And so everybody in the classroom said it's choice B. And I don't know if you can read it from sitting back there in the back of the room, but choice B says the commutative property of multiplication. So that is the correct answer. So it is a multiple choice question. That's the way Math Lab will be. The next one says 6 plus parentheses x plus 8 is the same as 6 plus x in parentheses plus 8. I'll always be adjusting this screen for y'all to see. When trying to find properties, look at the operation. Well, it's obviously addition. Okay, now, did anything commute? Did any of the numbers or letters move? No. What changed? The groups, the parentheses, the groups changed. What is it called when the grouping changes? Associative. So it is, for this question, it is choice A. Okay. Next one. It has 5 parentheses 8 plus 6 is equal to 5 times 8 plus 5 times 6. That is distributed. What it doesn't show, but you recognize happened, is that 5 got multiplied or handed out to each of those. So it is choice D, the distributive property. Number 4. It has 3 times y in parentheses times an 8 is equal to 3 times y times 8. What's going on? Is it commutative? Did any of the terms move? Or did the grouping change? Grouping changed. And when the grouping changes, it is associative. Number 5. It says 0 plus 2 is still 2. Identity. You added a 0 to something, which means you get identically what you started with. That is the identity element of addition.
See, it's totally different now when you
Good.
trying to learn this.
It's a little harder. Okay, number 6, property. It has -9 parentheses y plus 6 is equal to -9 times y plus -9 times 6. I heard somebody say it softly. That is the distributive property. That's what you should be thinking. Oh, that 9 got distributed to each of the terms. So it's choice D. Ooh, still red. Next one. Now, this one's a little sneaky. I wouldn't do this to you on a test. -7 times 9 times 8 is the same as 9 times -7 times 8. I think this is sneaky because it's 2 properties. Do you see any commuting? Do you see that anything has moved? Any of the numbers?
Yes.
Yes. Do you see that the -7 and the 9 have switched places? So that's commutative property. But there's also a new grouping. The 9 and the 8 used to hang out, and now it's the 9 and the -7. So I wouldn't do this to you, but it's in MATLAB. This is both the commutative and the associative property of multiplication. And that's it. Okay? So we will say that this lesson is done.